just accepted it because that's who I am. And I hope that that message is able to go out and that people are able to see that and understand that, and the purposes of inclusion and of educating people as much as possible.
Yeah. I remember when we go back to that first post and we started communicating, I've been inspired ever since then about getting you on the podcast and being inspired as far as trying to help you get your message across to the more of our listeners, more guests, etc. Because it's very inspiring and it brings huge awareness to the community.
Yeah, and that's what I really hope for, that the message can be shared, that parents even who are hearing and have deaf children, that they know that they can choose the right path for their kids, and that they're empowered with that, and that they can feel inspired that their children can be successful and can grow, and can be leaders as well.
Yeah, I like the culture that you're trying to cultivate, because culture starts with habits, and your habits of expressing yourself with your family, your friends. Me as a total stranger at one point, now we're like bros, but it's been amazing, man.
Yeah, you just have to. I try and get out there as much as I can, and share as much as possible because, we have to focus on self growth. But I'm pretty satisfied with who I am, and now I know that it's time to start educating and passing on that what I've learned through my growth to other people.
hmm And early in the intro, I mentioned the ADA for the ADA community for the city of Midwest City, Oklahoma. The ADA is what does that stand for?
It's the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that's was passed in 1990, and that's been around ever since. And prior to that, deaf people really struggled with access, and it wasn't only deaf people, just people with disabilities in general, really struggled with accessibility and being able to have accommodations to meet their needs, and not because they were really they were barriered themselves, but because of the environment created barriers for them. And so that bill was passed in hopes that the environment would be able to adjust and accept and integrate them and provide the accommodations and access that people with disabilities need.
Yeah. And recently there was a 911 text. So what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's one of the things that I've been pushing for so long. I think in 2015, 2014, when we started, the city of Midwest City started having public hearings, and they wanted feedback and input from the community at large, and to find out what the city itself needed to do to improve and how they could provide better accommodations and access for people with disabilities. And as a deaf person, I felt like I needed to be there. I needed to be part of that, because I know that a lot of people on the committee, they usually have other disabilities. They allow that, and they focus on physical barriers and physical environmental issues, but not auditory barriers. So I felt like my voice was important there to give that perspective and possibly shift their strategies and their structure to focus not only on physical disability, but also on auditory needs.
Yeah. So when you go into the committee and you present, of course, you sign to the committee and how they respond.
Yes, I signed and I asked for an interpreter, and that's how I express myself. So I get my ideas and opinions out of improving, and one of those was text to 911. I saw that in the East and the West Coasts and other areas, they were establishing that system, and I studied how they were able to do that, and that we needed to be moving that direction. And so I brought that into the committee, because it's very frustrating if I'm out driving around, or if I'm out on a walk, I can't report a crime. I can't call for help. If I witness something, or an incident or an injury, if I'm stuck, I have to drive to the police department to try and contact them. And by that time, the witness, the criminal, whatever's happening, it's going to be gone. And so then at that point, it's almost a moot point. So I need to be able to, you could save someone's life, and I need to be able to have that same access. And it was really frustrating to feel that way. And I knew that it was important to educate them, that the system needs to be able to meet the the needs of the next generation. And this next generation system does that. That it has the ability to accept video and also to bring in other hints and tips from people that could bring in from social media and be able to recognize specific words in social media and use algorithms to identify criminal patterns, and that can help the 911 responders respond quicker and perform their duties. So I gave that idea to our committee that we need to upgrade our system. And as that went through, as it progresses, they can add more things with the audio, the video, and those things being able to be accessible. And then technology just makes it better for everybody.
Yeah, that seems like a really huge win for the entire community, entire state, the nation, because it's about being verbal and nonverbal, and the ability to communicate either way is so important.
Right. I've noticed stories of other places when they have established text 911 that it saved lives. Like people who there's an abuser in the home, they're with them, and they wouldn't be safe to try and call 911 on the phone and talk because somebody would hear it. And so in that case, they can send a text message and get help. And I've seen that kind of story happening and people's lives being saved. So it doesn't only apply to me as a deaf person, but it can be used in a lot of situations where you have to be quiet in that kind of setting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's saved lives, and I've also seen a few stories locally on the news. All the channels they're having this covered in Oklahoma City. I think the city of Edmond is another one.
Yes, Edmond was actually the first one.
Mm-hmm.
I think they set it up, and they had a story in Edmond that kind of initiated everything. And I really applaud them for that, because they'll really save people's lives through this. And I felt, that's something that my needs may even help somebody else who doesn't have the same need for accommodation, but could still benefit from it.
Yeah, that's a huge moment for you because you're a big time advocate for that. So when you go through life, what other moments, personally for you, I call them defining moments, have brought you here to where you are today?
Oh, there's always a lot. There's always many. When I was really young, I remember being a small boy and my mom and dad were deaf and would sign at home, and our home was always in sign. That's how we communicated. And when I went to a hearing school, I saw other kids that didn't have the same opportunity as me, even though they were deaf. They didn't have that access at home. And I didn't understand why they didn't have that, why they couldn't communicate like I could. They didn't understand world issues and things that were going on at that time. And it was frustrating, but these were my friends and I still loved them. It didn't really matter if they were experiencing language deprivation and what things they were going through. I still wanted to spend time with them, and I wanted to bring them along and help them along in that and try and inspire them to continue to do more. And at times I would feel like my education and my needs, compared to other hearing kids in their backpack, they'd have different kinds of work. They'd have different math that I hadn't seen before, that they weren't giving me in class. And I was trying to figure out why that would be that way. And I asked my parents, what is an X? What does that mean in math? I've never seen that before. And my parents said, oh, in math, that's multiplication. So my hearing peers were doing that. And I said, well, why am I not doing that? My friends that are hearing, they're taking multiplication in math, but we haven't started it yet. And that's where my parents realized that, I hadn't progressed to that point in class, but that it was appropriate at that time. I think I was in third grade. So that would have been appropriate skills to be working on. And that started concerns with my parents and working through the IEP process. And I guess that was, I was never really involved in the IEP discussions at that point. I was younger. They just kind of set me outside in the lobby somewhere, and I'd wait for the adults to finish the meeting to address my educational needs. But I didn't really understand what was happening. But I remember them having that meeting and my parents struggling and feeling frustrated. I could see that in their faces after they would come out of an IEP meeting. And I didn't know why. I didn't understand what had happened. And as we went along, based on our conversations, I began to recognize that they didn't feel satisfied with what the school was able to provide me. and that if they weren't satisfied, what were we going to do about it? And over time, I care about my friends and the friendships that I had at school. But I asked my parents one day, I said, where did you go to school? And they said, well, we both went to the Oklahoma School for the Deaf. And when I realized that, we went wrong, and I continued to think about it and process through that, and I thought it might be time for me to try that and to go there, and that I may be able to expand my language and my opportunities, my education, and different areas that I needed to grow, and that I'd be able to meet my parents' expectation. And they said, yeah, we think it might, or I thought it might be time. So I told them I wanted to go to the deaf school. And so I went for about half a year at that first time. When I joined, and it was 1989, like I said, and I went along for the last semester, and the hearing people involved are always concerned about the noise or if it's too quiet. But in the cafeteria, kids are always talking. They're loud, and that level just increases. So, and that was in the hearing school, but at Oklahoma School for the Deaf, it's a different kind of noise. You hear trays banging down. You hear people pulling chairs back and not caring about the noise that it makes and that environmental sound. Kids yelling across to try and get each other's attention. And that wasn't normal to me. I felt like that wasn't right because I hadn't been there before. And I felt uncomfortable. And I actually asked parents to go back to my hearing school because that was the environment I was used to. And OSD was a new kind of setting. So when I went back to that mainstream setting for the next part of that year, I spent time during that summer really thinking, and of course I was enjoying my summer as a kid, but trying to figure out where I needed to be. Should I be at the deaf school, or what did I want to do? And I decided that was what I wanted, and I was going to tough it out. I was going to stick it out. And so I told my parents when they asked, they said, where do you want to go to school next year? What's the plan? I said, I want to do OSD. And I went all the way through the rest of my high school and graduated in 2000. And that was kind of where my world was. My language at home was through American Sign Language, and that was the same way at my new school at OSD. And I was able to communicate fluently with everybody there, with my friends, without any kind of problem. Every now and then we'd have somebody come in that was new, that wasn't fluent in the language yet, and they experienced language deprivation, not having access to sign language at home. And that's not their fault. But I remember those times trying to help them and bring them along, because I had that experience of being left out in a hearing school, and I knew how they were feeling. So I wanted to be able to provide that intro and access to people who were coming into the deaf school for the first time.
Wow, that's a really impressive story, and I can tell by your body language that you're really passionate about the time when you went from a hearing to the OSD, and the struggles that I feel like I can emotionally sense that you had. What have you learned from that transition from going to an audible school to OSD?
Well, I learned how to better interact with different kinds of people, understand different concepts more. After I had that experience, I had better understanding of concepts that kids who had experienced language deprivation, it wasn't necessarily their parents' fault at that time. Parents didn't have the resources that they needed to make, educated understanding about how to better provide for their kids, for their deaf students. It's really the system. The system is based on auditory spoken language, and that's what we expect everybody to do. We expect everybody to be able to talk and listen, and so they try and bring people to accommodate in and meet and match the system that already exists, instead of making the system match people's needs. And I really saw that.
You talked about talk and listen. For me, it's almost like just actively, I always talk about active listening, but right now I'm actively watching and paying attention to what you're doing. And that's why I can sense the energy, and that's why I can sense that you're excited and you're huge about sign language and how we're going to spread this message and make it even more widely known, and how even podcast could expand and become better for the community. And inclusion's a huge word, so I appreciate you talking about that. It's huge for me too.
Yeah. I'm a big supporter of diversity, but I'm also a big supporter of inclusion. I think that that's really important, that we accept people from different parts of the community and that everybody is included. Without that, we can't succeed. We can't do it without lifting people up. Individually, it won't work. We have to lift up everyone and carry this all together into the future so that we can continue to improve.
Yeah, I love that attitude. Number one, it's awesome. I can just tell it by just you being able to meet me for the first time at the coffee shop in Midtown.
Yeah, I do remember that, and I remember that first kind of awkwardness when we sat down. It was kind of an awkward silence there for a minute, but we were able to communicate in text, and I just really enjoyed your motivation to try and connect no matter what, no matter where you were at that time, regardless of your experiences, and that in that moment, being willing to try. And that moment was really important to lead us to where we are today and to be here doing this, and feel like we're brothers in two different worlds, in two different universes, just going parallel, and we're able to make that connection.
Yeah, that actually just gave me chills, man. So thank you so much for that. I remember when we first did meet and I talked about, I coached soccer, boys competitive soccer for a very long time. And I always talk about the importance of communication, whether it's verbal or nonverbal. And even at soccer practices, we would even have it where nothing was verbal. Everything was eye contact, body language. How do I want the ball? Where do I want it? So for me, awkwardness at first, sure. However, it was really, we warmed up rather quickly.
Yeah, we really did. We really did. And it was really quick to just be able to make that connection and feel like we understood each other and were able to move on. And I feel like not only because English is my second language, I think seeing that in your parents as well, seeing their experience and experiencing English as a second language and still being able to thrive and succeed here in the United States. And that would be an inspiration to you, I can imagine, growing up. And that they were able to do that and I've been able to do that, and that connection of those experiences, that language is important, yes, and that's why I want that same access to be provided to deaf children who, grow up deaf, that they should be able to see that and yes, understand hearing society, but they should also be confident and have access to their linguistic needs and be able to thrive however they can.
Yeah. So when you graduated from OSD and then that next level was going to find a job, how was that?
That was a big learning experience for me because, I recognized later that my network of people was mostly deaf. And I didn't have a whole lot of networking and connection with the hearing community at that point. So when I would go into a job, it was really a struggle to try and, I tried to start at Mathis Brothers, and that's where I started my first job and figuring out how to do that. And I eventually moved on to Walmart, and that was a little bit of a struggle working with them. But as I just continued, I was also in college at the time, so doing those two things at the same time, working and doing college, was difficult. But so just trying to balance my life, and you'd have kids showed up, so that increases your responsibility. So I'm trying to support my family and then also go to school and do work all at the same time. So getting through that was an experience, but I'm here today. I work for the state of Oklahoma, and I help people make roads. That's what I do. And, I feel very, very happy with where I am and content with where I am. But I was figuring out that I needed to include hearing people in my network when something happens, so that when I meet somebody, I can interact with them and communicate as well. And that's where the ADA and the council with the City of Midwest City and the committee that I'm on is a big part, like Boy Scouts programs and different hearing organizations that I can connect with to try and bring that inclusion.
Yeah, and you went to college, so then I don't know if the VOTECs here, vocational technology centers, do they have classes that teach sign language, or do they have professors that hold classes in sign language for you to get that next level of education?
Well, I went through college with an interpreter. I had an interpreter in my classes, and that was what helped me have access, because I'd grown up at a deaf school, or I'd gone through a deaf school, and that's where teachers do sign. So there was no barrier to me interacting directly with my instructor. Even if, hearing teachers, a lot of times they will be writing on the board looking backwards, and so you can't get that information. But when you have a teacher that does sign themselves, you can actually interact directly with them without a third person making it make sense. So I hadn't had that experience before, and when I went into college, I had to adapt to that environment of not being able to have a direct conversation with my instructor, my teacher. I had to depend on the interpreter at that point, and their qualifications, if they were good, and if I could understand their signing, if they had the linguistic skills that I needed. So those were all important factors that I had to start learning to consider. So I had to start telling people, I couldn't understand this interpreter. Could we get this interpreter in that class, to make sure that I was able to better understand and access my education? So I'm always an advocate of trying to get an interpreter and the needs and accommodations met at colleges and anywhere that I go. I purport for that and work on that. And, if I go to the doctor, I have an interpreter, and I request that through their office. So I always have an interpreter when I'm in a public accommodation setting like that.
Yeah, so and you brought up a great point about the doctor. So when you request it, how long does it take for the interpreter to get there in case, let's say you have an emergency, you got a fever, how long does that take for an interpreter to get there?
Well, emergency situations, I'm lucky I haven't had a serious emergency happen where it was a life-threatening emergency at this point. Yeah, exactly. Knock on wood. But I haven't had that happen. But I have been to the emergency room, and when we get there, we request an interpreter, and it can take a while for an on-site interpreter to arrive. I believe that the ability to save lives is in video remote interpreting, VRI. That's done through video, and it's instantly accessible, and that's a good tool to save people's lives that are in right now life-threatening situations. That it can be very helpful, because you can connect to an interpreter on a screen immediately and bring them in, and I think that's really important. But on-site interpreters are also important, that they can be used in tandem. It depends on the timing and the situation of what would be appropriate. And some people in the deaf community are not fans of VRI. They'd rather have an on-site interpreter. But in some situations, it could be important to have that other accessibility option. For example, for my privacy, I live here and there's a lot of interpreters here. So if I'm having to, have a personal exam, I may not want an interpreter in the room, and that can be really awkward. Some of the situations we have with a doctor, and that doesn't happen with a VRI interpreter. They can just be on a stand. You can turn the iPad, face it up, and it doesn't matter if you're unzipping or what, they can't see anything. But a live interpreter, I don't know where their eyes are. I don't know what they're doing. So it can be a valuable tool.
That's pretty funny. What's the most frustrating part about just going to the doctor, going to the grocery store, school, work? What are a couple things that are frustrating to you?
Well, the most frustrating thing is when I'm hearing people who are just ignorant. We know they think that the whole world can hear. They expect me to lip read. That's the most frustrating thing. I met a person before that at Whataburger, and I was going there to eat and was trying to order and wrote down my order, or I was trying to indicate that I needed paper to write down my order, and she talked to me, and I motioned again, no, I need to write. and she just kept talking. And I finally had to, point at my ear and be like, hey, I can't hear. I need paper, and motioning what's pretty clear, but she just kept talking at me. And she was talking to people in the kitchen. Finally, somebody came over, and I got their attention and did the same motion to write, and they just instantly gave me a piece of paper and pen. And so we wrote down our order and gave it to the woman at the register that we had started with, but she kept talking at us. And I just couldn't figure that out, that she still didn't understand that I'm deaf, that she could talk all she wanted, but I had no access to that. I had no way to know what she was saying, and that she just didn't seem to understand that I was different in that way. So after we finished our order, we went over and sat down, and it was the same lady who brought us our order. And she came over and continued to talk to us at the table. And I'm like, you still don't get this? Like, at what point, how do I do this? So that gets frustrating. Like, how can I make you understand? What can I do for that? I've pointed, I've covered my ears. We've had to write down, my whole family is signing that we're all deaf. Like, at what clue do you need? So that gets frustrating. People who are just closed-minded and don't seem to want to understand, and understanding other people's needs. That's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah. Do you think that since we're in 2019, about to be 2020, with technology that we have, you go into Whataburger, they have touch screens where you can just order what you want and pick it up? I don't know if they have that. I don't go to Whataburger, so.
Well, I'm not here advertising anything, but no, they don't have that kind of order confirmation or kiosk, anything like that at Whataburger. McDonald's does now. I've noticed that they established that very quickly. Taco Bell is also getting that kind of technology, so I think that does help a lot, because then I can go in independently and just go straight over and get what I want. So that's a big help. It can be a little bit of a struggle sometimes, because we've got 5 people in my family, and some of the kids are picky, and so we have to delete different ingredients. You have to edit and customize. No lettuce, no tomato. And do all of that to get everybody exactly what they want. But when I grew up, I just learned to accept what I was given. So, and I'd eat whatever my parents gave me. But we just pointed to the menu, and whatever it was, however it came, the default was what we got. But now it's much more customizable, and my children are used to that. So I wish I could go back and just say, you eat what you get. That's what's on the screens. But that's society today. That's the way it's going.
Yeah, no, that's fair and that's honest. I would hate for myself to go into a McDonald's or Whataburger. Well, my wife probably wouldn't let me anyways, because she's got sensitivities to gluten. So it'd be interesting to say, yeah, I don't want gluten on this. I don't want this. I want that. It'd be all these ingredients. And it's like, man, what are we going to do? What are we going to eat? We're just going to sit there.
Yeah, I feel like that sometimes as well.
Chick-fil-A, though, they're pretty decent, right?
Yeah, they're pretty good. And they don't have an order kiosk system either.
Oh, okay.
But we write down the order, and then I've noticed they seem to be pretty good on accuracy with their order compared to a lot of other places. And I don't know what the difference is in that, but their business culture is very different. And sometimes when I write down an order with them, I get the food and it's completely different with other places. It's not what I ordered or what I wanted. And you have to go back up and show them what you wrote down, and this is what we ordered, but this is what's on the plate. So what's going on? And sometimes if it's messed up, you might get it comped and get different food, or even more food than last time. So that might explain this belly right here, but
oh man. Well, if you don't mind, let's take a little deep dive into your personal life a little bit, just about you, because this podcast is basically about you. I like to know, what are maybe 2 questions you wish people would ask you more, that no one really ever asks or signs?
I've had experiences with different kinds of people, and some people, for example, like not understanding that deaf people can drive or can drive a stick. And I don't understand how they don't understand that. And I've asked, why do you think that deaf people can't do that? And then apparently hearing people do that based off of the sound of the engine. But I can feel that. I can feel when the motor is ready to shift. So things like that. And I wish hearing people were more understanding of who I am, that they wanted to know that. Not focusing on what I can or can't do based on auditory focal, but that I can be a whole person without all of that, without hearing and listening and speaking. Hearing people depend on those needs so often, and they try and apply that to their environment all the time, but I don't need that access. I can function without those. For example, we're doing this in a music studio. There's musical instruments all over the place on the walls, and they don't have any meaning to me. I just know what they are, and I understand that through feeling, through vibration. If you turn the music up, I can feel that in my body. If a person is playing on a drum, I can often understand that and connect through that because I can feel it. So I can access that without my ears working. But there are some things that, if I can't feel it, I'm not going to feel inspired by a guitar or something like that, just acoustic, because I don't have access. But I still have ways to access music without focusing on my ears. And, some people, that if they would ask me who I am as a person and how I get through my day, I can be successful and I can thrive in this world where a lot of people believe that I need to be able to hear and need to be able to access sound. I can still be successful in a world that's silent to me. I go swimming and I feel just fine by myself. We had a barrier. How do I say between? Okay, so we had a barrier between us. But if I go swimming, I can still communicate through water or through a window or across distance, and you can't do that. I have an ability that hearing people don't have, or across a room where people are talking. I can sign to people and have that conversation still. So my life and my experience has positives and negatives, but I can still be successful with that. And I'm able to merge and have interaction with a lot of different people.
Yeah, it's interesting you talked about can deaf people drive a stick shift. And I remember back when I was younger, it was a 4-speed, but you really can feel when you're able to shift, upshift, downshift, without actually hearing anything, but just getting the feeling of the way the car is and the motor and the revving of the engine. You can definitely tell when you need a shift. If not, I guess we're in trouble.
Right, absolutely. But that's something some people have asked. I drive a car that's not automatic, and I can still feel when it's having an engine problem.
Mm-hmm.
I can feel that something's different and that something's not right. And I can try and figure out what's causing that vibration. If it's something that I can fix, if it's an issue that I know about. Sometimes it can be frustrating because, it's based on sound, it's based on hearing. But people say, well, does it sound like this or does it sound like this? And I can't do that. I can just say it feels different. So why don't we describe how it feels when you're driving it, what that effect is. So trying to, again, meet other people where they're at instead of my needs being met, so that I could then recognize what the issue is and be able to fix my car.
Yeah, I love it, man. It just comes with communication, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just about communication. It may be silent, but you can feel, you can see, and then when you have that sound all in, there's a different experience, but it improves it all when you have that accessibility from different viewpoints.
Yeah, I agree. And speaking of sound, of course, Jake is doing the voice, and it's amazing the energy that you both have with each other. It's really fluid.
Yeah, I met Jake a while ago. It's been a few years, but he signs well, and I noticed that he could communicate the way I need him to, and I thought he must have had deaf family or something like that. When I found out that he was hearing and didn't have any deaf people in his family that he would have learned from, I told him that if he was born again, he'd probably be deaf because of the way he signs. And I have a connection with him. I can communicate easily with him, so it's a good time.
Yeah, it's actually super amazing. I'm really impressed. If we didn't have social media or just any type of technology and we just had the phone or in person, who would be three people you'd like to meet or have a conversation with in real life?
I've spent a lot of time thinking about that because I know that some people are really inspirational, motivational, uh, and but they may not be the right person. But one person that I do wish that I have never met face to face that I wish I could interact with would be Niall DeMarco. I really do wish I had an opportunity to sit and talk with him. He comes from a deaf family, and he's deaf himself. I think he's fourth generation deaf, and I would really like to spend time understanding him and where he came from and what his family environment was like, and how it parallels mine. And people who have multi-generational deaf, that's an understanding and a different life that we have, that deaf kids who are born to hearing families don't have that experience. So that's one person I've thought about. A second person in the political arena, um, a person who's being spoken and motivational of the grassroots movements. Somebody I would really like to meet would be Bernie Sanders. He really just pushes people to speak out, to be involved, um, from the grassroots level, and to push for the needs and the changes that they want, and to spread information and education. I'd really like to learn from him as how he does that. Uh, he really inspires me. Um, but I'm also really inspired by Martin Luther King and the way that he uh, was so big with the civil rights movement for Black Americans, and the noise that he made, and how they just were able to grow that movement so much, and draw attention to the civil rights movement. I wish that I had those same skills to address that kind of movement in my community and make that kind of ground shaking movement and sound, and get people's attention to the needs that are not being addressed, especially language deprivation in deaf children. That's a barrier we really want to reduce as much as possible, so that deaf children are able to sign and thrive, and access in parallel with written and spoken, or with written English. So he understands how to move and shake, and I just feel like that would be a really good time to pick his brain. Um, One more person might be you know oh, in the celebrity arena, I guess Russell Westbrook. He's a star athlete, and I'd be kind of interested to get to know him and understand him too, and why he chose the number 0. But he still just inspires people, and is such a force. But the number means nothing. The 0, it's an absence. But his organization. And foundation. I've forgotten the name of it off the top of my head, but the Why Not Foundation.
Oh, yes.
That's the name of his foundation, and it's just why not. And I'm really impressed with that. Like, why not? Why not try it? Why not do something like that? Why not go for it? Why not be here today? And that I can share my moment with you guys. So I think that that's really inspiring, and that's something to think about. Is just why not?
Yeah, that's interesting. So let's fuse these two together: the Why Not movement, and you talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. about him making ground, making noise. What's holding you back?
Well, really, um, I don't feel like there's anything. I feel like I'm on a movement. I just hope that I can bring in the hearing community with me and make that movement, and bring people in as our allies to continue this. You know, the deaf community is here, and I feel that, and I know that they're here and support me, and I have big support from my community. Um, but we just need more than us, to bring us onward and upward, uh, just to continue to motivate and progress, and that we'll be able to accomplish these things in the future.
Yeah, I love that. I'm inspired. My wife is inspired, and we took the like, why not do a podcast with you? Because you are an inspiring man, and what you're doing is super impressive, and we need more of Johnny Juniors running around to spread this message. You know?
I agree. We need more deaf advocates. We need
Yeah.
deaf people. We really are struggling here in Oklahoma. My experience right now as an officer, on various boards, I've had experience that I can share and give on to other people, that they can continue this, and that they can do better in the future. But we have to keep that. We have to keep that movement going, and we have to keep talking. And it's really important part of this here in Oklahoma. You know, we're in the middle of the nation. We're in the heart of the United States, right here in the heartland. So I really wish we could change this here, and that would go out. Not only that we'd see it on the East and the West Coast, but that it would come across the United States, and maybe it would start here and go out.
Yeah. You brought up Bernie Sanders earlier, and so I noticed, because it's a political figure, so I noticed on Twitter, Governor Stitt actually was doing some sign language on Twitter. I don't know if you saw that or not, but he was doing some sign language about some bill or that they were passing. It was really interesting.
I haven't seen that, actually. I wasn't really paying attention to a lot of the local issues at the moment. I've been looking at some more national issues, but there's a lot of attention needed here, locally, for sure, and I totally know that. I'm still just pushing my involvement in the city and trying to get those needs met, hopefully, and that will lead up to a higher level state and nationally. But I really just wish that we could be the first. The East and the West Coast, they seem to be successful in so many areas, but I hope that we can be the first to make some change. A storybook, Wealth of the Grapevine, I think is the name of it. It was back in the Dust Bowl. The Grapes of Wrath, back in the Dust Bowl, and that people left Oklahoma and then they came back. And that's the same concept, that I hope that the impact can happen here and then go out, and not just happen outside of here.
I love it, man. What would be a piece of advice you would give your younger self?
Oh, I was a shy person back then. So really, I look at my youngest son, and he's much more outspoken. But I wish I could tell myself to be like him, to just speak up for what I feel and what's going on. My younger son is really cool, because one day we were driving with the windows down, and there was another person in a nice car next to us, and we were, at a stoplight, and it seemed like it'd probably be pretty quick. And he was talking to that person out the window, and I was like, something felt funny, and I looked over and realized what he was doing, and they were complete strangers that he's talking to out the window, from the car. That was a much nicer car, and at that point, I just felt like, do I need to roll up the windows? Do I need to keep these up when he's in the car? But just I wish I could be like that. I wish I could be that kind of outspoken person. Since I was little, I was very shy and feeling like I didn't understand things that were going on. And now that I've had, more experience out in the world in college, I feel more empowered, like I can do those things and use my language and to educate people and to put that message out as much as possible. But that's a later developed, and he's already there. So I feel like if I could have done that earlier, imagine the kind of things that could have happened and the changes that I could have experienced. And if I could have learned that earlier and younger, I could be a better person.
Yeah. Well, you are a really good person, so thank you.
Well, thank you. I try. I just try to be the best that I can, and I'm really happy with who I am and content. I've said that a couple of times. I'm satisfied with where I'm at. So now I want to bring that on and pass that on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I always talk about there's no finish line in life. We just got to keep moving, and we pass it on generation to generation. And I feel like that's what you're doing with the community and the world, actually.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. I think that there's a lot of finish lines. There's not one. That you don't just get to the end and you stop and you're done. You break off the tape, but you just keep going.
Yeah, I agree with you 110%, man. If you were to look back at your life, let's say 10 years ago, and you had a certain belief in something, come back to today, is that belief still strong, stronger, or not as strong?
So my beliefs over the last 10 years. I think there are some things that I've removed. I've started to notice my privilege more and trying to unpack that and trying to remove that. And the purpose of that unpacking is so that I can understand other people and people that have a different experience than me. If I don't do that, if I don't unpack that and try and go through that, how can I be their ally? How can I, if I refuse to open my mind to them, and if I can be open to them and their stories, then they can be open themselves and we can make a connection and we can thrive together. Like today's a great example of how this friendship has happened, and how this is great. You were open and I was open and we were able to come together and we end up here. So, and just take off. So I feel like we really do understand each other, and that's something that's really important for other people that have a different life experience.
And I absolutely agree with you. And there's a good connection, and it's a deeper connection than just a surface level. It's a deeper connection as far as I want to understand more. I want to learn more. I want to continue to learn from you and the community, so we can bring in both communities and make it one big community for a better life for everyone.
Yes, absolutely. There's that old story. I don't know if it's an idiom or a quote or a proverb or what, but that says it only takes one. But it takes it takes a community to raise a child. It takes a village. And that if we can just all think about diversity and inclusion and all of that, that if we can bring that together as a community, we can raise deaf kids to be successful.
Yeah. What do you think in the next 10 years you would regret if you did not do?
In the next 10 years, I've been thinking hard about this one, but I'm really thinking about trying to run for the House of Representatives for the state of Oklahoma. Not the federal, but at the state level at least. And that's one big dream that I really have. And I'm motivated and want to pursue that. And it won't be necessarily soon, but I hope within 10 years it could happen. And right now I'm just trying to be involved at different campaign groups and different political events. And that's been a real struggle, actually. And another issue is trying to be accessible with campaigns, because when I tell them that I'm deaf, I often get pushed to the side and not included. And I'm here and I want to contribute and I want to be able to be a voice in my community for your cause. But when I get left out, it seems like they don't want me and they don't want my community. So trying to connect with different campaigns. I've been doing that for a while. Linda Wade has been my first campaign that's really brought me in. And I've told her, I'll drive you around. I can do a lot of things. I don't have to be a spokesperson, but I can go do knock on doors if I need to. I can do address accessibility needs for your campaign. So that experience, I really feel I want to do more of that, and so that I can understand it more, and that I can continue this on with other campaigns, and continue to understand, and that they will understand that one day I could potentially represent our community as well.
How does John Reininger Jr. want to be remembered?
I want to be remembered as a person who's didn't always think of himself, but lifts up other people and lifts up everyone, and lifts up the community. Deaf children and deaf kids and their future, those are things I'm passionate about, and I want everybody to be satisfied with those things in their own life, and to be inspired by me, and to take that example and use it to pass it on to the next generation after them.
Yeah, I love it. What piece of advice do you have for our listeners, our viewers, anything? What piece of advice do you have for us in life?
Well, just keep going. Keep going. You just have to keep going, and it doesn't matter when you're hitting walls, hitting barriers, you feel like you're up against a rock. You just have to keep going. Sometimes as people, we have to be that squeaky wheel. You have to keep making noise, and then finally somebody's going to come down and oil it. You just have to keep going and do what you want, and keep up with it and not give up. And people will eventually recognize that. They'll recognize that, and change will happen. And that's the kind of thing that's really important, is that perseverance and persistence in whatever your goals are.
I like it. Great advice, man. I appreciate that. How do our listeners and our viewers get in touch with you? No cell number. Do you have an email?
I'm pretty available on Twitter. It's at, spell it again, tune it down _ UHU or HUH. Tune it down, huh? So the reason for that, it's actually a funny story. As I was getting together with a few of my kids do have some hearing, and they listen to music, and it's the kind of music where I would say turn it down. That kind of like loud music, and I enjoy that because I can feel it. Other people would say turn it down, but I get to be involved with my kids in that, in the car, and it's loud and it's bumping in its bass, and people, it's kind of turn it down for what? Why would we turn that down? So I made that my Twitter handle, turn it down, huh? So it's tune. That was an interpreter mistake. That's tune it down. Because when you're tuning the sound, your hearing ears depend on everything being in tune and exactly right, and the voice being the right pitch, and that doesn't really mean anything to me. So I don't need it to be tuned. I can just live without tuning, without those fine settings.
That's awesome, man. I'm with you. Last question of the day for you. If you look into that camera, John, do you approve this podcast?
Yep. As John Reininger Jr., I approve this podcast.
My name is Wong Lam, and I approve this podcast. Thank you so much.